The Mediators return. You want to know what it feels like to spend your whole life running from something you can't name? It feels like a word you can almost hear, like someone calling your name from very far away in a language you don't quite remember, but that your body knows. I was 4 years old when I learned to run. 4 years old when the flames came, when the horse's hooves shook the ground, when a woman who was not my mother grabbed me from my bed and carried me into a river, so cold it stole my breath. That woman's name was Osa. She was my guardian, my protector. The reason I'm alive to tell you this story. She died in my arms 19 years later. And on her deathbed, she told me one last thing. She told me that the feeling I'd carried my whole life, the pull, the word I could almost hear, the longing I'd learned to ignore, wasn't grief. It was real. It was a dragon. His name is Vorthanak. He is 800 years old. And for 5 centuries, 500 years of silence, of watching, of waiting, he has been calling to the last surviving member of a bloodline he thought was extinct. That bloodline was mine. That survivor was me. For 19 years, I ran from him. I crossed rivers and forests and the graves of everyone I'd ever loved, putting distance between myself and the one thing in the world that was actually running toward me. And then, one day, I stopped. This is the story of what happened when I finally turned around. The dragon who waited. The king who talked to silence. And the love that found us both when we'd stopped looking for it. Chapter 1. The gift I was born with. I used to think the pull was grief. That's what Osa told me when I was small enough to sit in her lap and ask why I sometimes felt something pulling at me from the west. From the direction of the city none of us ever spoke about. From the place where, she finally admitted when I was old enough to press, my parents had died. It's grief, she said. Your body remembers them. It wants to go toward what it lost. And I believed her. Because Osa never lied to me. Not once, not ever. Except about the one thing that mattered most. Except about the gift. Except about the channel. Except about the dragon she knew was waiting for me, calling to me across 200 miles of forest and river and farmland, calling with a patience so vast that 19 years was nothing to it. I believed her because I had to, because the alternative was believing that something was wrong with me, that the feeling wasn't grief but longing, longing for something I'd never known, never touched, never even seen. And that kind of longing, in a child who'd already lost everything, felt like a wound I didn't know how to carry. But the truth Osa carried alone for 19 years, the truth that sat in her chest like a stone she'd swallowed and could never cough up, was that the gift didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't magic that appeared in me by accident, or some curse that had attached itself to my bloodline like burrs to a hem. It came from my grandmother. Her name was Elara. Elara Aldera. She died before I was born, died in the purges, Osa told me once, when I was old enough to hear the word and young enough not to understand what it meant. Died protecting something, though Osa never said what. Died with her hands still reaching toward the west, toward the dragon she'd served for 40 years, toward the creature she'd loved more than her own life. Vorthanak. My grandmother was the last mediator before me, the last full channel, the last person in our line who could speak to dragons the way I was born to speak, the way I spent 19 years being taught to ignore. She served Vorthanak for 40 years. 40 years of counsel, of connection, of a bond so deep that when she died, he felt it across 200 miles. Felt her reach for him with her last breath. Felt the line go silent. She passed the gift to my mother, not deliberately, not the way you pass a torch, but the way blood passes blood. It lived in my mother's hands, in her eyes, in the way she could calm a frightened horse or set a broken bone without the patient ever feeling pain. My mother never trained as a mediator. There was no one left to train her. But the gift was there, dormant, waiting, coiled in her like a spring. And when I was born, it uncoiled in me. Osa knew this. Of course she knew. She'd been there when my grandmother died. She'd held her hand while the life drained out of her, while Elara's eyes stayed fixed on the west, while her lips moved around words Osa couldn't hear but knew were meant for the dragon. And she'd made a promise there in that burning city, as the smoke rose and the hooves shook the ground. I'll keep her safe. The line won't end. I'll find a way. And she did. For 19 years, she kept me safe. For 19 years, she watched me grow into the gift I didn't know I had, watched me feel the pull toward something I couldn't name, watched me walk west every evening and come back every night, always wondering, always longing, always believing it was grief. She never told me about Elara. Never told me that the pull was real, that the dragon was real, that the grandmother I'd never met had loved him for 40 years and died reaching toward him. She couldn't. The risk was too great. The name Elara was still written in ledgers as a warning. The church still had documents, still had records, still had mechanisms for finding and eliminating anyone who carried the taint of the Mediator blood. So she lied. The only lie she ever told me, repeated across 19 years, maintained with the same fierce consistency with which she'd kept me alive. I tease grief. Your body remembers them. But it wasn't grief. It was inheritance. It was my grandmother reaching across the grave, through the blood, through the channel that never truly closed, calling me home to the dragon she'd served, to the bond she'd carried, to the legacy she'd died protecting. The day I finally answered that call, the day I walked into Vorthanak's enclosure and felt him look at me with my grandmother's eyes, I understood. The pull had never been toward death. It had been toward life. Chapter 2. The River in Winter. I was 4 years old when they came for my family. I don't remember the fire. I don't remember the screams or the horses or the men with torches and documents, and the particular calm of people who believe they're doing righteousness. I don't remember any of the things that Osa, years later, would tell me she still saw every time she closed her eyes. What I remember is this: running through darkness. Someone's arms around me, tight, desperate, the grip of someone who has decided that nothing in the world matters except this one small body they're carrying. The smell of smoke and pine, and someone else's fear. The sound of my own breathing, fast and scared, and the sound of her breathing, fast and determined. And then cold. So cold. The river in winter, the water stealing my breath, the arms never letting go. And then silence. The kind of silence that happens when the thing chasing you finally stops chasing. When you've crossed a boundary they won't cross. When you're alive and they're not coming and you don't yet know what alive is going to cost you. Osa held me in that river until the current carried us far enough. Then she carried me out, wet and shaking, into a world that didn't know my name. She changed our names that night. She changed everything. We became someone else. 2 women from nowhere with no history, no family, no reason for anyone to look twice. She found a village 60 miles east, small enough that strangers were noted but poor enough that no one had the energy to investigate. She found work. She found a house. She built a life from nothing, the way she'd always built things, with her hands and her will and her absolute refusal to let the world take anything else from her. I grew up in that village. I grew up learning to be small, to be quiet, to be the kind of person no one remembers seeing. I grew up with Osa's love, fierce and practical and expressed not in soft words, but in relentless attention to survival. She taught me to read, to cook, to heal small wounds and recognize larger dangers. She taught me to keep my head down and my voice low, and my eyes on my own business. But the pull never stopped. When I was 12, I started walking west from the village every evening, just to the river, just until I could feel the pull get stronger, just long enough to prove to myself it was real. Then I'd turn around and walk back. I told myself I was learning to manage it. I was actually just spending time with it, letting it be real, letting myself want, even if I could never have. OSA died in the first deep cold of winter. She was 73. She'd been sick for months, though she never admitted it, never slowed down, never stopped doing the work of keeping us alive. That was OSA. She'd hold herself together by sheer force of will for as long as she needed to, and then, when she decided it was safe, she'd let herself rest. I was there when she went, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, watching her breathe. She'd been unconscious for 2 days. But in the last moment, her eyes opened. And she looked at me. Really looked. The way she used to when I was small and scared and needed to know I was safe. And she said, just barely, just enough. The books. Your mother's books. They're not what they look like. Then she closed her eyes. And she was gone. I buried her myself. Put a marker with the wrong name over the grave. The name she'd chosen to protect me, not her own. Stood in the cold for a long time afterward, thinking about what was next. What was next was in her room, in the trunk under her bed. In the books I'd seen 100 times, the ones she said were herbalism and astronomy and general philosophy, the ones I'd never opened because they looked ordinary, and OSA had taught me that ordinary was safe. They were not ordinary. My mother's books. In the margins, in the spaces between the printed words, in a handwriting so like my own that I had to stop twice in the first chapter just to breathe, my mother had written the truth. About the gift. About the channel. About the Mediators. About the dragon in the city of Vorthanak who had been waiting for her line to return for 5 centuries. About me. I read those books for 40 days. I read them by daylight and by candlelight, through tears and through the particular numbness that comes when the thing you've always suspected turns out to be true. I read my mother's voice reaching across 19 years of silence to tell me who I was. The gift chooses its own time, she wrote. It cannot be forced, cannot be rushed, cannot be called before it's ready. But it will call. It always calls. And when it does, go toward it. However afraid you are, however impossible it seems, go toward it. The dragon is waiting. 40 days after OSA's death, I packed a bag. 40 silver coins, my mother's books, a change of clothes. I locked the cottage door. I left the key under the stone where OSA always left the spare. And I started walking west. Chapter 3. The Death That Preceded Me. As I walked toward Vorthanak, death was walking ahead of me. 40 miles east of the city, in the citadel's most guarded chambers, the king's younger brother lay dying. His name was Prince Aldrich, named for the first king Vorthanak had served, as if the family had always known they would need that name again. He was 26 years old, a priest by choice rather than obligation, the kind of man who genuinely believed in something larger than himself, who spent his days in the temple libraries and his evenings with the poor. The entire city adored him. He was the heart of the royal family, the softness his brother Marcus could never afford to show. And he was dying of a sickness no physician could name. Vorthanak knew. Through the channel I hadn't yet learned to open. He felt it all. The sickness. The fading. The desperate prayers of a city that didn't know he was listening. And he knew something the physicians had missed, something the conspirators believed they'd buried so deeply no one would ever find it. The illness wasn't natural. There were only 2 people in the world who could cure that poison. 2 healers whose knowledge ran deep enough, whose hands knew what other hands could not. One of them was walking west along a dusty road, carrying her mother's books and a lifetime of inherited grief. The other was an old woman named Mara. Mara had been the royal physician's teacher decades ago. She'd retired to a small village in the east, believing her work was done. She was 78 years old, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but they still remembered every remedy, every way to pull someone back from death's doorway. She had trained 3 generations of healers. She had delivered half the babies in her village and sat with half the dying. The conspirators knew about her. They'd known for weeks, ever since their agent in the citadel confirmed that the royal physician was helpless. They knew that if word reached Mara, she would come. And she would succeed. So they made sure no summons ever reached her. The assassin had been watching her for 3 days. He knew her routine. Knew she took tea at dusk, that she read by the fire until the candles burned low, that she checked on her neighbor's sick child each morning. He waited for the right moment. It came on the 3rd night, when the autumn storms rolled in from the mountains and the village shut itself against the rain. He entered through the back door, unlocked, because in this village, no one locked their doors. He found her sitting in her chair, reading. She should have died there, silently, without ever knowing why. But Mara had not survived 78 years by being stupid. "You're letting in the cold," she said without turning around. "Close the door." The assassin froze. She turned then slowly. Her eyes, the gray of deep water before a storm, found him in the shadows. "I've been expecting someone," she said calmly. "Not you specifically, but someone. The boy in the citadel, the prince, he's dying, isn't he?" The assassin said nothing. "And they think I'm the only one who can save him." She set down her book. He moved. Fast. Professional. But Mara was faster, not at escaping, not at fighting, but at speaking. "Tell them," she said as the blade entered her chest, as her body crumpled against the chair. "Tell them." He pressed harder. Her words stopped. But her eyes, those knowing, ancient eyes, stayed open, fixed on him, accusing. He closed them with his own hand, unnerved despite himself. He searched the cottage. He found her journals, her correspondence, her records. He burned them all in the fireplace, watching decades of knowledge turn to ash. He did not find the letters she'd hidden in the hollow wall behind her bed, letters from my mother, written years ago, speaking of a daughter with healer's hands and mediator's blood. He did not find the small portrait tucked inside, a sketch of a young woman with dark eyes and a heart-shaped face. He did not find the truth. I didn't know any of this, of course. I was walking west, 40 miles away, my mother's books in my satchel, and the pull growing stronger with every step. I didn't know that an old woman had died with my name on her lips. I didn't know that her killer had burned her journals, not knowing that everything I needed was already in my hands, passed down through blood and love and the stubborn refusal of women who had the truth in plain sight, so it could survive. The conspirators believed they had just sealed the prince's fate. They didn't know about me. But Vorthanak knew. Through the channel, he felt Mara's death like a wound. Felt her final thought, her hidden, last, desperate gift to the world. The girl lives. The last mediator lives. Find her. And he sent his call roaring through the channel with an urgency I had never felt before. Not just the old familiar pull, something new. Something that screamed across 200 miles of forest and river and farmland. Hurry. Time is running out. 2 weeks later, I reached the gates of Vorthanak. 2 weeks too late to save Mara. But just in time for everything else. Chapter 4. The City and the Dragon. I reached the gates of Vorthanak at dusk. The city rose before me like something from my mother's books, towers of pale stone, canals catching the last light, the citadel crowning everything like a fist of gray granite raised against the sky. I should have been awed. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was focused entirely on the pull. It had been building for days, stronger with every step, more urgent, more desperate. By the time I reached the gates, it wasn't a pull anymore. It was a roar, a presence, a voice I couldn't hear but could feel, screaming across the distance between us, saying only one word. Now. Then the ground began to shake. The guards at the gate stumbled. Horses reared. People screamed. And from somewhere deep in the city, from the citadel, from the eastern wing, something rose into the sky. Vorthanak. He was flying. The sound swelled, a massive rush of wings larger than sailing vessels, the whoosh of displaced air, the collective gasp of a city that had never seen their dragon move. 800 years old, and he flew. Straight toward me. Straight out of the gates. straight toward the woman who had been running from him her whole life and had finally stopped. He landed 50 feet from the gates. The impact shook the ground for a mile. His wings folded, each one longer than a sailing vessel, their membranes the color of old blood in the dying light. His scales caught the amber sun, deep gray-green warming to gold, each one the size of a shield. His horns swept back from his skull, dark as obsidian, ridged with age. Steam rose from his nostrils in fast, urgent bursts. And his eyes, enormous, amber, vertical pupils burning with a steady inner light, were fixed on me. Only on me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything except stand there, 23 years old, 40 silver coins in my pocket and my mother's books on my back, staring at the creature I'd been running from since before I could remember. And then, through the crack in the channel, the one that had been there my whole life without my knowing, he spoke. Not in words.
Not yet.
But in meaning. In feeling. In the pure, undiluted truth of 8 centuries of waiting, compressed into a single moment of recognition.
You.
Finally.
You.
I felt tears on my face. I didn't know when they'd started. And I heard myself whisper, aloud, for the first time, to anyone, the words I'd been carrying since childhood. I know you. I've always known you. I just didn't know your name. The sound that came from him then was not a roar. It was something older. Something like the earth shifting deep beneath mountains. Something like recognition given voice. The moment lasted less than a minute before the city erupted around us. Horns. Distant at first, then closer. The call of the king's own guard. The signal that something requiring the crown's immediate attention was occurring. Soldiers poured from the gates, forming a half-circle around Vorthanak. The crowd surged toward me. It's her. The dragon flew to her. She made it happen. Is she a witch? That last word hit me like a physical blow. Witch. The word they'd used for my mother. For my family. For the Mediators they'd burned. I stumbled backward, my hand gripping my satchel, my heart pounding hard enough to crack my ribs. Then, Vorthanak turned his massive head toward the crowd and roared. Not in anger. In protection. The sound was unlike anything anyone had ever heard, deep enough to shake the stones beneath our feet, loud enough to rattle windows in their frames, ancient enough to silence a city that had forgotten it could be silenced. The crowd stopped. The soldiers flinched. In the stillness, he looked back at me, and through the crack in the channel, I felt his message as clearly as if he'd spoken aloud.
Run. Now.
I will hold them. But you must run. I didn't question it. I ran.
Chapter 5.
The Healer and the King. I found work on my 3rd day in the city. A physician in the market quarter, an old man named Garen, had more patients than he could handle. A fever was going around, the kind that struck children hardest, and he was run ragged. I offered to help. He watched me set a broken wrist in half the time he'd have taken. He watched me calm a feverish child with nothing but my voice and my hands. He watched me work for 3 hours without stopping, without complaining, without asking for payment. You're hired, he said at the end of the day. Room and board such as it is. Don't ask questions, and I won't ask any either. It was humble. It was hidden. It was perfect. Each evening, after my work was done, I walked toward the citadel. I told myself I was learning the city, learning the guards' routines, learning when the courtyards were empty enough that I could stand and look without being noticed. I was actually just drawn the way water is drawn downhill, the way iron is drawn to a magnet. Each evening with the guide on station standing nearby, I stood in the courtyard below the eastern wing and felt his warmth pulse through the channel. I see you. I'm still here. I'm still waiting. What I didn't know was that I was being watched in return. 3 floors above, in a window I never thought to look up at, a man stood watching. He'd been watching for 3 days. Not the dragon. He'd watched the dragon for 30 years. No, he was watching her. The small woman in the simple healer's clothes who appeared each evening at the same hour, who stood so still, who looked at the enclosure with an expression he couldn't name but felt in his chest like an old wound reopening. He didn't know why she drew his gaze. He only knew that when she wasn't there, the courtyard felt emptier than it should. That when she was there, something in him went quiet, the way the sea goes quiet before it recognizes something coming. His brother was dying 200 feet away. Physicians came and went, offered prayers and apologies and empty hands. The reward he'd offered would make a family rich for generations. He watched the woman turn to leave, watched the fading light catch her dark hair. And for the first time in weeks, he thought, what if I'm looking in the wrong places? I never looked up to check. I was too afraid of what I might find. The night Vorthanak woke me with urgency shuddering through the channel, I was already on my feet before I was fully conscious.
Now. He needs you. Go now.
I didn't question it. I pulled on my boots and moved. I was passing through the market square toward the Citadel's side gate when the shouts found me. The particular urgency of voices calling for help. A guard, sent running by the king's physician, had fallen badly in the dark and narrow streets. Compound fracture of the forearm. The bone visible. The blood significant. Someone grabbed my arm. You're a healer, right? Garen's girl? Come with me, T. I ran. For minutes to the physician's hall, my bag bouncing against my hip, my breath coming hard. I ran past guards who stepped aside without thinking, past attendants who pointed without speaking, past an open door where a man lay gray-faced on a table, bleeding onto the palace floor. I set to work immediately. His fracture was severe. The bone had pierced the skin, and infection was already threatening. I cleaned the wound thoroughly, set the bone with careful precision, applied a poultice from my mother's recipes that would draw out any corruption. I spoke to him softly throughout, explaining each step before I took it, keeping him from the edge of panic. I didn't look up when I heard the doorway fill. I need more light. Can someone hold that torch higher?
No, toward me. Yes.
And whoever is now standing in the doorway is blocking what little we had, so I would be grateful if they would step to the left. The someone in the doorway stepped left. I kept working. My hands did what they knew. My attention stayed fixed on the wound and the bone, and the man whose life depended on me getting this right. When I finally looked up, to thank whoever had moved, I found myself looking at a chest. I tilted my head back.
And back.
And found myself looking at the tallest man I had ever seen. He filled the doorway. He filled the room. He filled the world, somehow, just by standing there, 7 feet of muscle and bone, and the particular stillness of someone who has learned that his presence changes things. Dark hair, slightly tousled. A jaw that could anchor ships. Eyes the color of drawn steel, one heartbeat before it becomes a weapon. He was looking at me with an attention so complete that I felt it physically, like pressure, like heat, like being read down to the bone. Oh, I said. That was all. Just oh. Which was not, I realized an instant later, the appropriate response to finding oneself face-to-face with the king of Vorthanak while covered in someone else's blood. But he didn't seem to mind. Finish your work, he said. His voice was low, not deliberately soft, just contained. Is he going to be all right? I looked back at the wound. My hands had never stopped moving. He'll be fine. It looks worse than it is. The break is clean. 6 weeks off training, but he'll have full use. I worked.
He watched.
Most people I'd learned found being watched uncomfortable. But his watching was different, not the surveillance of someone looking for weakness, but the attention of a craftsman watching another craftsman's work.
Direct.
Specific. Appreciative. You're not one of the Citadel physicians.
No.
Market quarter. But your physician was occupied, and waiting wasn't the right option. So you came. So I came. Your hands are very good. It wasn't a compliment in the social sense. It was an observation, the recognition of quality, without the softening of flattery. I understood it instinctively. Thank you. They've had considerable practice. And your name? I paused. The smallest fraction of a beat, the ghost of 19 years of practiced caution.
Neil.
My name is Neil. Just Neil. Just Neil. For now. He studied my face. The way he looked at everything, I would learn, all the way through, with the full weight of his attention, and decided not to press. I could see him making that decision. It took about 2 seconds. I'm Marcus. I knew who he was. Not because we had met before, but because something in me recognized him the way the channel recognized Vorthanak, the way my blood recognized something it had been calibrated toward. And because of the way everyone around us had fallen silent, had stepped back, had bowed without being told. Most people are considerably more visibly alarmed by that. I'm alarmed. I'm simply better at not performing it. And Marcus Aldenvarn, King of Vorenthos, Shield of the Concordat, Warden of the Three Rivers, laughed. Not the measured laugh of a man at court. The real one, sudden, unguarded, arriving before he could decide whether it was appropriate. I felt my pulse double, and through the crack in the channel, from somewhere deep in the Citadel's eastern wing, I felt something else. Warmth. Vast and old and unmistakably pleased. The dragon was watching, and he approved. Will you come with me? Marcus asked quietly as I gathered my supplies. To see my brother? The physicians have given up. But I saw what you just did. I saw your hands. I'm not. I'm just a market healer. Your physicians have decades of training. My physicians have decades of training, and they're watching my brother die. He paused. Please. That word. From a king.
Please.
I nodded. He led me through corridors I'd never seen, up staircases that wound toward the heart of the citadel. Marcus walked with the particular grace of someone who had learned to be large in a world built for smaller people, never rushing, never threatening, simply occupying his space with precision. Twice our arms brushed in a narrow corridor, and each time, he moved slightly to give me room, as if the awareness of where I was in relation to him was automatic, unthinking. It was the smallest possible courtesy. It undid something in me. We reached the prince's chambers. The room was dim, curtains drawn against the evening light. In a great bed lay a young man who could only be Prince Aldrich, beautiful in the way dying things often are, pale and translucent, like a candle flame just before it gutters out. He was reading to the poor in the lower city when he collapsed, Marcus said, his voice rough. 3 weeks ago. He's been fading ever since. I moved closer, my healer's instincts taking over. I pressed my hand to Aldrich's forehead, warm, but not feverish. Checked his pulse, weak, but steady. Lifted his eyelids, looked into eyes that didn't see me. And then I saw it, the faintest discoloration at his temples. A pale blue tracing of veins that shouldn't be visible. A pattern I recognized from my mother's marginalia. It's poison, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. What? Marcus's voice was dangerous now. The voice of a king who had just learned someone was trying to kill his brother. A slow-acting poison, I said, still reading, still confirming. Derived from a root that grows in the eastern marshes. It mimics a wasting disease perfectly. The weakness, the confusion, the gradual shutting down of the body systems. By the time anyone suspects poison, it's usually too late. I looked up at him. But it's not too late. Not yet. Can you cure it? I thought of Mara, the old healer in the eastern provinces, the only other person in the world who could do this, now dead. I thought of my mother's hands. My hands. The gift that ran in my blood. Yes, I said. I can. Chapter 6. The Making of a Kingdom. For the next 3 hours that first night, I worked. Marcus stayed, not hovering, not interrupting, just present. A quiet, enormous presence at the edge of the room, ready to help if needed, content to wait if not. The treatment was complex. First, I had to draw the poison out, a poultice of specific herbs applied to his chest and temples, changed every 30 minutes. Then rebuild his strength. A broth I prepared myself in the adjoining kitchen, feeding it to him a few drops at a time. Finally, a series of pressure points along his spine and neck, stimulating his body's own healing responses. Each day, I returned. Each day, I repeated the process. Each day, Aldrich improved. On the second day, his breathing deepened. On the third, color returned to his cheeks. On the fourth, he opened his eyes and asked for water. On the fifth, he recognized his brother. Marcus wept when Aldrich spoke his name. I pretended not to see, busying myself with my supplies, but I couldn't pretend not to feel it. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth spread through the citadel like a sunrise, and I had to press my lips together so Marcus wouldn't hear me make a sound. Okay, I need a pause here because wow.
Just wow.
A king who waited 44 years. A woman who ran for 19. A dragon who waited 8 centuries. And one garden that brought them all together. If that doesn't make you believe in timing, I don't know what will. Here's my question for you in the comments. What's the one thing you're still waiting for? The thing you haven't given up on, even when it felt impossible. And while you're typing that out, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. Because this love story, it's far from over. And the best parts? They're still coming. Throughout those weeks, something else was growing. Something I hadn't expected, hadn't planned for, hadn't known I wanted. It started with small things. Marcus appearing in the doorway of Aldrich's chambers with tea for me. Hot, sweet, exactly as I liked it, though I never told him. Marcus walking me back to Garen's practice each evening, his long strides slowing to match mine, his presence a shield against the dark streets. Marcus asking questions, real questions, not polite ones, about my childhood, my training, my mother's books. I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone. About OSA and the river and the years of running. About the pull and the dragon and the fear I'd carried my whole life. About the weight of being the last of something, of carrying a legacy you never asked for, but can't put down. He listened. Always listened. Completely, without interruption, without the performance of sympathy that I'd learned to distrust. And when I finished, he didn't offer empty comfort or easy answers. You're not alone anymore, he said simply. Not if you don't want to be. That was all. And it was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever said to me. One evening, as he walked me home, we passed the enclosure. Vorthanak's presence pulsed through the channel, warm, curious, aware of us both. Without planning it, without discussing it, we both stopped walking. The courtyard was empty. The torches had just been lit. We drifted toward the wall and sat, our backs against the ancient stone, our arms just barely touching in the dark. He knows we're here, I said softly. Does he mind? That I'm with you? I closed my eyes, reaching through the channel. What came back was unexpected, a warmth that wasn't just for me, but for him. Approval. Welcome. Something almost like affection. He approves, I said, surprised. He says he's been watching you for 30 years. That you're the first king since Merwin who talks to him like he's real, not just a symbol. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The torchlight moved across his face, and I watched the emotions cross it. Surprise, then something older. Something like being recognized. I was 14 when I started coming here, he said finally. My father had just died. I had no one to talk to. The council wanted a king, the court wanted a performance. My brother was too young to understand. So I came here. I sat in that courtyard and talked to the dragon. Told him everything. He heard you. He heard all of it. I know. I think I always knew. He looked at me then, really looked, the way he had in the physician's hall, as if memorizing every detail of my face. Thank you, he said. For him. For my brother. He stopped, seeming to search for words. For making me feel like I'm not just a king. Like I'm a person too. I reached for his hand without thinking. His fingers closed around mine, warm, enormous, impossibly gentle. We sat there in the shadow of the enclosure, hands clasped, while the dragon watched and the stars came out and something between us shifted into place. Neither of us moved for a long time. Neither of us wanted to be the one to break it. That night, back in my small room at Garen's practice, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. I had spent 19 years becoming invisible. Becoming the kind of person who didn't touch things she couldn't keep, who didn't want things that could be taken away, who kept her heart behind glass because glass at least gave the illusion of safety. Marcus Aldenvarn was not a thing that could be kept behind glass. And I was running out of reasons to try. The next evening, he told me about the prophecy. We were sitting in the enclosure again. It had become our place, by unspoken agreement, the way certain things become yours without ceremony. His shoulder was warm against mine. Above us, Vorthanak's presence filled the space with that deep geothermal warmth that felt less like heat and more like being held. There was a prophecy, Marcus said. At my birth, the last oracle of the Northern Isles sailed south specifically to deliver it. She said the king who talks to silence would find his voice in blood, not his own. That she would come from ashes, bearing the dragon's mark. That when she arrived, the gap between throne and ancient covenant would close. I felt my heart stop. Until her, he continued, his voice dropping low, none other shall suffice. Until her, the king's heart shall remain untouched, waiting for the one who is always coming. He turned to look at me, those gray eyes warm in the torchlight. I've waited 44 years, Neil. I've met princesses and noblewomen and every eligible woman in 3 kingdoms. And I felt nothing. Not coldness, just the absolute certainty that none of them was who I was waiting for. And now, his hand tightened on mine. Now I understand why. I leaned into him, my head against his shoulder, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth intensified, approval, joy, the deep satisfaction of watching 800 years of waiting finally begin to resolve. Above us, the first stars appeared. Chapter 7, The Recognizing. 3 weeks into Aldrich's recovery, the council learned about me. Not everything, not who I really was, but enough, a market healer with uncanny skill, elevated by the king to tend the prince. Enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to start whispers. Enough to make powerful men uncomfortable. Vorthanak woke me in the small hours, his urgency vibrating through the channel. They are watching. They are planning. They are patient.
But they know something has changed.
I told Marcus. He doubled the guards, increased the watches, vetted everyone who came near me or Aldrich or the enclosure. But we both knew. You can't guard against shadows. You can only wait for them to step into the light. What neither of us expected was what found us instead. The first public sign of the Covenant's restoration came during a council meeting. A dispute had arisen between 2 noble houses over water rights, a complex issue that had festered for generations. The council was deadlocked. Marcus was preparing to make a ruling that would satisfy no one. And then I spoke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I simply opened my mouth and let Vorthanak's words flow through me. The history of the water rights, the original agreement between the houses, the precise language that had been misinterpreted for 200 years. I knew none of this myself. I was simply the channel, the voice. When I finished, the council chamber was silent. The 2 noble lords stared at me, their faces pale. Finally, Lord Harvin, the oldest member of the council, a man who had served 3 kings, rose from his seat. He walked toward me slowly, his ancient eyes fixed on my face. "Young woman," he said, his voice trembling. "How did you know that?" Those records were lost in the fire of 312. No living person has seen them. I didn't know it, my lord. The dragon knew. He remembers everything. Lord Harvin stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly he bowed. The deep bow of respect. "The mediators have returned," he said, loud enough for the entire chamber to hear. "The covenant is restored. Blessed be the day." One by one, the other council members rose and bowed. Marcus caught my eye across the chamber. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those gray eyes, warm as I'd never seen them, held something I couldn't name. 1 week later, he brought me to his mother's garden. Situated above the palace by his section of the palace, accessed through his bedroom. I hadn't known it existed. A small rooftop space, hidden from the city below, surrounded by ancient stone walls. White flowers covered every surface, small and northern, impossibly delicate, blooming in profusion against the weathered stone. They caught the last light of evening and glowed like held breath. "My mother's garden," Marcus said quietly. "No one else knows it's here. I wanted you to see it." I couldn't speak. The beauty of it, the intimacy of it, overwhelmed me. He had brought me to his secret place. The place that was his. "I know we haven't known each other long," he said, not looking at me, his voice rough. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel like myself for the first time since I was 12 years old." He turned to face me. Those gray eyes, the color of drawn steel, but warm now, warm as I'd never seen them. "I don't know what this is, Neil. I don't have a name for it. But I know I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you." I reached for his hand, that enormous hand, capable of such violence, so gentle with me always. "You won't lose me," I whispered. "I've been running my whole life. I'm done running." He pulled me close, not desperate, but tender. His arms wrapped around me, surrounding me completely, and I pressed my face against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Strong, steady, home. The first time he kissed me, we were standing among the white flowers. It happened the way such things happen when two people finally stop pretending. We had been standing close, closer than necessary, the petals brushing our clothes, the evening air cool around us. He reached up slowly, giving me every possible moment to step back, and touched my face. His hand was enormous, covering my cheek completely, but his touch was impossibly gentle. "Neil," he breathed. And then his lips were on mine, soft at first,
questioning.
Then, as I responded, something in him let go. The careful control he wore like a second skin, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like truth. His other arm came around me, pulling me closer, and I felt the full warmth of him. The strength, the tenderness, the years of loneliness finally finding something to reach toward. When we broke apart, we were both breathless. He pressed his forehead to mine, his eyes closed, his breath unsteady. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid. Of pushing too fast. Of wanting too much." He opened his eyes, looked at me. "Of losing this before I even had it." I cupped his face in my hands, small hands against his strong jaw. "You're not going to lose this." He kissed me again. Deeper this time. Longer. When we finally pulled apart, the stars had begun to show, and through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth surrounded us both. Approval, joy, a deep and ancient satisfaction that felt like 800 years of waiting finally breathing out. "Finally," he seemed to say. "Finally." A week later, in the enclosure, he said, "I haven't said anything. You are about to." "How would you know what I?" "Because I can feel it. Not the channel, just you. The way you get when you're about to say something real. You go very still." He was, in fact, very still. "Then you know what I'm about to say." "Yes." "Then why don't you want me to say it?" "Because I'm frightened." He took my hand. "Tell me what you're afraid of." "I'm afraid of caring about something I could lose. I've lost everyone I was born to." He didn't flinch, didn't offer easy reassurance. Just held my hand and waited. "I can't promise you won't lose me," he said finally. "I'm a king. My life belongs to more people, than just myself. But I can tell you, I've felt something since the physician's hall that I don't have a name for. I've tried respect and admiration and affection, and they're all wrong. They're all too small. I turned to face him. All the way. The full weight of my father's eyes. My mother had a word for it, I said. Alpha bloodlines sometimes carry it, the capacity for a specific kind of recognition. Not love exactly, not at first, it comes before love. It's the thing that makes love possible in a particular way. She called it the recognizing. The deep part of you finds the exact person it was calibrated toward. And when you find them, every other part of you has to catch up. But the deep part already knows. Have you ever felt it before?
No.
Never. And now, I looked at him, really looked, at the gray eyes that had been watching me for weeks, at the hands that had held me so gently, at the man who had brought me to his mother's garden. Now, I said quietly, I think I've felt it my whole life. I just didn't know what it was. His breath caught. I reached for his hand and turned it over. Then I pushed up my sleeve, exposing my wrist. The band. Silver. Ancient. Unmistakably priceless. Catching the torchlight. Do you recognize this? He stared at it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, like a man waking from a dream, his free hand reached out, touched the band, traced its edge. His eyes lifted to mine. Where did you get this? A man gave it to me. 7 years ago. In a forest. He was dying, bleeding from half a dozen wounds. I saved his life. Before he lost consciousness, he pressed this into my hand and said he would find me, that he would thank me properly. I held his gaze. I never saw him again, until the day you filled that doorway in the physician's hall. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the torches burning. You, he breathed. You were the girl, the healer in the forest, the one with the steady hands and the eyes that looked at me like I was just a man. I didn't know who you were. I only knew you were worth saving. He pulled me into his arms, desperate, shaking, holding me like I might disappear if he loosened his grip. I looked for you, he said against my hair. 7 years. I sent men to every village, every town, every healer within 100 miles. I never found you. I started to think I'd imagined you. I was real. I've always been real. I've been wearing your band every day for 7 years, never knowing it was yours. He pulled back, looked at me. Those gray eyes, the color of drawn steel, but warm now, warm as the garden had been, warm as everything between us was finally allowed to be. The recognizing, he said. Is that what this is? That my blood knew yours 7 years ago, in a forest, when I was dying and you were the last thing I saw. Tears fell freely, and I let them. I think so, I whispered. I think it's always been you. I just didn't know your name. He kissed me then. Not the slow, questioning kiss of earlier. Something deeper. Something that carried 7 years of searching and 19 years of running and 5 centuries of waiting, all of it converging on this single moment, this enclosure, this man. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth surrounded us both. The dragon had waited 800 years for this. I had waited 23. Marcus had waited 7. And now, finally, we were all exactly where we belonged. Chapter 8. What the night holds and what it offers. The weeks that followed were the happiest of my life. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. The conspiracy still lurked in shadows. Aldrich was still recovering. Marcus still had a kingdom to run, council meetings to endure, lords who questioned every decision he made. But in the quiet spaces, the evenings in the enclosure, the walks on the eastern wall, the stolen hours in his mother's garden, we had each other. And that was enough. He was careful with me in ways I hadn't expected. Large men often have a blind spot about the weight of their own presence. They don't mean to overwhelm. They simply haven't developed the habit of calibrating. Marcus calibrated. He'd spent his whole life doing it, The constant, practiced awareness of himself in space, and the adjustment. When he touched me, he did it slowly. Not from hesitation, but from deliberateness. This, here, with full attention. The way someone handles something they know is significant. I was careful with him in return. Not because he needed protecting, he was 7 feet of muscle and authority, capable of killing with his bare hands, but because he needed seeing. The person beneath the crown. The boy who had lost his mother at 12 and spent 30 years talking to a dragon because he had no one else. We saw each other. We held each other. And slowly, beautifully, we healed each other. One evening late in his private chambers, he told me about the council. They raised succession again. Formally this time. Lord Harvin has prepared a document, 11 pages, listing all the ways my current domestic arrangements fall short of dynastic necessity. And what did you tell him? I told him I was considering the matter. Which means I've been thinking about nothing else for weeks, and I am aware that my thinking has not been entirely uninfluenced by the fact that Neil. He turned to face me fully. The size of him in the lamplight. The steady gray eyes. I know what you are. Not just the gift, all of it. What it means that the people who shared it were killed. What it means for me to want you publicly. I know the danger, and I have been laying out exactly what I am prepared to do about that danger. Marcus. I'm not finished. I know. But I need to say something before you do. I put my hand on his arm. Small hand, large arm. The contact. I grew up believing the thing I am was a death sentence. I spent 19 years treating the most essential part of myself as something to hide. And then the pull brought me here.
To him. To you.
You're the first person who has ever responded to knowing about the gift by asking what he could do to protect it rather than what he could gain from it. He was still. I continued. 6. I am terrified of losing you. I am more frightened of losing you than I have been of anything since the night OSA ran with me in her arms. And I have learned from experience that being frightened of losing something does not make it wise to protect yourself by never fully having it.
He reached for me.
Both hands, that careful, deliberate motion. My face between his palms, tilted up. From the physician's hall, he said low. The first day, something in me went entirely quiet for the first time in years. Like putting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. And then you were not looking at me and the quiet just was there. And I thought, there it is. Whatever that is. I know. I felt it. Then let me stand in front of whatever comes. I've been standing in front of things alone for 19 years. I know. And you're exceptional at it. And you don't have to do it alone anymore. He kissed me, not gently this time, with the full unheld weight of everything he'd been meaning for weeks. I met him with equal force, equal intention, all the careful distance collapsing into this. His hands moved from my face to my shoulders, then down my arms, tracing the shape of me, as if memorizing it. I arched into him, my fingers threading through his dark hair, pulling him closer. A low sound escaped his throat, and I felt it vibrate through my entire body. Neil, he breathed against my mouth. I know. I want it too. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his gray eyes dark with wanting. Are you sure? In answer, I reached for the ties of his tunic. Let me, he said softly. Let me do this. He undressed me slowly, reverently, as if I were something sacred. Each piece of clothing that fell away was accompanied by a kiss. My shoulder, the curve of my neck, the hollow of my throat. By the time I was bare before him, I was shaking, not from cold, but from the intensity of being seen so completely. You're beautiful, he whispered. Gods, Neil, you're so beautiful. I reached for him, pulling him down to me. When he entered me, I cried out, not in pain, but in the shock of finally being joined to this man who had been searching for me for 7 years. We moved together in the candlelight, learning each other's rhythms, each other's sounds, each other's secret places. He was gentle when gentleness was needed, fierce when fierceness was wanted, present in a way I had never experienced from anyone. When I shuddered beneath him, calling his name, he followed moments later, his face buried in my neck, his body trembling with the force of it. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the quiet. His arm was around me, my head on his chest. His heartbeat was slow and steady beneath my ear, the most reassuring sound I had ever heard. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth pulsed. Not intrusive, just present.
Acknowledging.
He knows, I murmured. Does he approve? I reached through the channel. The response came back warm, amused, deeply satisfied. He says it's about time. Marcus laughed, that real, unguarded laugh that had become the sound I most associated with safety. Then he pulled me closer and pressed a kiss to the top of my head. I love you, he said quietly. I've loved you since the forest. I just didn't know your name. I tilted my face up to look at him. I love you too. I've loved you since you filled that doorway and didn't try to be smaller than you are. Stay tonight. Stay always. Always, I agreed. And in the warmth of his arms, with the dragon's presence surrounding us both, I finally understood what OSA had been running toward all those years ago. Not away from death. Toward life. Toward this. Chapter 9. The Unraveling. The conspiracy that had killed my parents, killed Mara, killed the former king, it had been patient for 20 years. It would not remain patient much longer. I could feel them sometimes. A prickle at the back of my neck in a corridor. A shadow at the edge of my vision in the market. A presence that didn't belong to any guard's routine or servant's errand. Vorthanak felt them too, had been tracking them for 2 decades, waiting for someone with the channel open to receive what he'd been holding. They know something has changed, he told me one evening. They cannot yet identify you. But they are coming. The trap was Aldrich's idea. Let me help, he said, his voice still carrying the careful steadiness of a man not yet fully recovered, but determined not to show it. I'm the bait they've already tried to kill. Let me be the bait that catches them. Marcus was against it, fiercely, protectively against it. But Aldrich was stubborn in his gentle way, and eventually Marcus relented. We spread word that Aldrich was failing again, that the cure had stopped working, that the physicians had given up hope, that the king was desperate. And then we waited. On the 4th day, Brother Malachi came to Aldrich's chambers with tea. For strength, your highness. The physicians say you need to keep your strength up. Aldrich took the cup, lifted it toward his lips.
And stopped.
Brother Malachi, he said quietly, would you pray with me before I drink? I find myself in need of spiritual comfort. Malachi's face flickered, impatience quickly hidden. Of course, your highness. They prayed. Aldrich's eyes were closed, his lips moving in familiar words. Malachi's eyes were open, fixed on the cup in Aldrich's hand with an attention that was not devotion. When the prayer ended, Aldrich lifted the cup again, and I stepped out of the shadows. Don't drink that, Aldrich. Malachi spun, his face going white. I'm the healer who saved his life the first time, I said, walking toward him slowly, my eyes fixed on his. And I know what's in that cup. Malachi's hand went to his belt, to the dagger hidden there. But before he could draw it, guards flooded through the door. Marcus followed, his gray eyes cold as winter steel.
Brother Malachi.
You're under arrest for the attempted murder of the prince. Under interrogation, Malachi broke within hours. The name he gave was Lord Corvin, the same name Vorthanak had been holding for 2 decades. A minor noble with major ambitions. A patient man. Corvin was arrested that night. Under questioning, he gave up the others. The High Cleric, 3 council members, 2 wealthy merchants. The names Vorthanak had been carrying in his memory like stones in a river, worn smooth by time, but never lost. The conspiracy that had killed my parents was finally exposed. The confrontation came at dawn. 11 men, council members, church officials, wealthy merchants, marched on the citadel with documents and soldiers of their own. They had proof, they claimed, that the king was harboring a witch, that the dragon had been corrupted, that the Mediator bloodline had returned and must be eradicated before it destroyed the city. They didn't know that Marcus was waiting for them. They didn't know that I was standing beside him in the throne room, my mother's signet ring on my finger, Vorthanak's warmth at my back. They didn't know that the dragon had been watching them for 20 years. "Hi, Cleric Orvain," Marcus said coldly as the men were brought before him. "I've been expecting you. Your Majesty, I don't know what you've been told, but I've been told the truth. For the first time in 20 years, I've been told the truth." He looked at me. "Kneel." I stepped forward. The channel was open, Vorthanak's words flowing through me like water. "On the night of the former king's death, you met in a chamber beneath the temple," I said. "There were 7 of you then. You discussed how to cover your tracks, how to eliminate the witnesses, how to make sure no one ever discovered what you'd done." Orvain's face lost what little color remained. "The witnesses you eliminated included the Mediator families. My family. You burned them alive to keep them silent. But you forgot one thing." "What?" The word was barely a whisper. "Dragons don't forget." The names came next.
Dates.
Places. Documents that could be found, witnesses who could be produced. Vorthanak had been watching for 20 years, and he had missed nothing. By the time I finished, the 11 men were on their knees. Marcus looked at them for a long moment. Then, "Take them away." As the guards led them out, Orvain twisted to look back at me. His eyes were filled with hatred and something else.
Fear.
The fear of a man who had just realized that the thing he'd tried to destroy had not only survived, but had returned to witness his fall. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," I said quietly. He had no answer. Chapter 10: The Garden. The trials lasted a month. When they were over, 11 men had been convicted of treason, murder, and attempted murder. Some were executed. Some were imprisoned for life. Some were exiled, their names struck from the rolls of nobility. Justice, after 20 years, had finally been served, and the kingdom began to heal. Spring arrived, and with it, peace. Aldrich recovered fully. He returned to his temple duties with renewed purpose, and he and I became real friends, the kind I'd never had before. He welcomed me into their family without reservation, which was precisely like Aldrich. He simply decided something was true and then lived accordingly. The people's awe at Vorthanak's council had deepened into something more. The bridge at Torrance Gate was reinforced. The eastern trade route was renegotiated. 3 border disputes were resolved. The drought threatening the southern provinces was addressed. It wasn't magic. It was a tension sustained across time, the gift of a dragon who had been watching for 8 centuries and could now finally speak. One afternoon, Aldrich found me in the enclosure and sat beside me with the particular contentment of a man who had recently survived his own murder and found the experience clarifying. "They're calling it the Second Covenant," he said. "There are already songs being written. The market healers have declared you their patron." "I'm not a patron. You're just the woman who saved my life, who speaks for an 800-year-old dragon, who happens to be the king's distant cousin and the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy." He grinned. "Modesty is charming, kneel, but at a certain point it becomes denial." I laughed despite myself. "The people love you," he said, growing serious. "Not fear you. Love you. You're the first mediator in 5 centuries who isn't a legend or a warning. You're real. You're here. You're theirs." Theirs. I sat with that word for a long time. I had spent 19 years being no one's, belonging nowhere, running from everything. And now I belonged to a city, to a kingdom, to a dragon, to a man. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was home. That evening, Marcus brought me back to his mother's garden. The white flowers were in full bloom now, every surface covered, their petals catching the last light and holding it like a promise. The air smelled of stone and green things and the particular warmth that only small enclosed spaces can hold. He stood looking at me for a long moment before he spoke. Something in his face was different. Not the careful stillness he usually wore in public, not even the warmth he allowed himself in private. Something older. Something that had been building for months and had finally, quietly, arrived. "I've been doing something I'm not sure I'm doing well," he said. "You do most things well. It's occasionally irritating." He laughed that laugh. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the recognizing. About what it means for the future." I waited. The white flowers moved in the warm evening air. "I want to be honest with you about something," he continued. "There's a practical consideration. The offspring of alpha bond pairings were the most gifted mediators in history. Vorthanak confirmed it. And that factors into what I'm about to say, because you deserve honesty about all the pieces, not just the ones that make me sound less calculated. But if I only said the calculated part, I would be leaving out the part that matters most. The part that is that when you're not in a room, the room is wrong. That you're the first person since my mother who has looked at me and seen just me. That you make me feel like myself in a way I'd forgotten was possible."
He stopped.
The man who ran a kingdom and signed treaties and silenced traitors with a look was standing in his mother's garden, holding something he didn't know how to offer without breaking it. "I am better at governing than I am at this." "I know," I said softly. "I find it very much one of your better qualities." He turned to me fully, the last light on his face. My face upturned. "Neil, the pull you felt for 23 years that led you here, I believe it was as much toward me as toward him. I believe the recognizing works in both directions. I believe I know, with the same certainty with which I know anything, that you are the person I was going to spend my life with." "I know," I said, crying and laughing both. "I've known since the forest. 7 years ago, when I found you bleeding in the mud. Something in me knew. I didn't have words for it, but I knew." "Then why didn't you tell me? In the physician's hall, why didn't you say something?" "Because I didn't know if you'd remember. Because I've spent my whole life being invisible, Marcus. I don't know how to be seen." He cupped my face in those enormous hands, the same hands that had survived battles, that had held the crown of a kingdom, that now trembled slightly against my cheeks. "I see you. I've been looking for you, for 7 years. I've been talking to a dragon for 30 years, waiting for someone who could hear him. I've been alone my whole life, and then you walked into my physician's hall, and didn't look up when I filled the doorway, and I knew." The recognizing. The recognizing. He pressed his forehead to mine. The white flowers moved around us. Through the channel, I felt Vorthanak's presence, warm, patient, watching, and his joy, his peace, his finally. "Marry me," Marcus whispered. "Not because of succession or alliances or what the council wants. Marry me because I've been looking for you my whole life and didn't know it until I found you. Marry me because you make me feel like myself for the first time since I was 12 years old. Marry me because I don't know how to be without you anymore." Through tears, through laughter, through the overwhelming rightness of it. "Yes," I said.
"Yes."
"Yes." He kissed me. The white flowers moved. The stars began to show. And close by, in his enclosure, an 800-year-old dragon lowered his enormous head and closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in 5 centuries, the warmth of belonging. Chapter 11th Blessing Multiplied. We were married in the great hall of the citadel, with the entire city watching. Vorthanak himself attended, not in the hall, but at its edge, his enormous head visible through the open arches, his amber eyes glowing with ancient approval. The ceremony blended old traditions with new. The High Cleric, newly appointed after Orvain's conviction, performed the rites. Aldrich stood as Marcus's witness, tears streaming down his face. And Garin, the old physician from the market quarter, stood as mine, the first time in history a commoner had stood in such a position at a royal wedding. When Marcus placed the crown on my head, not a queen consort's crown, but a queen regnant's, equal to his own, the roar from the crowd shook the very stones. Through the channel, I felt Vorthanak's joy like sunlight, warming every corner of the city. The celebration lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, we began the work of governing together. The months that followed were the fullest of my life. I learned to be queen while continuing to be mediator, balancing the demands of court with the needs of the covenant. Marcus was my partner in all of it, not just my husband, but my equal, my counsel, my home. And then one morning everything changed. I woke feeling strange, not ill, just different. Something had shifted in my body, something I couldn't name, but could feel. Through the channel, before I could even speak, Vorthanak's voice came, warm, amazed, filled with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. Kneel. You carry life. For lives. I sat up so fast the room spun. What? 4. I can feel them. 4 separate presences, 4 sparks of awareness. The gift runs strong in your line, but this is unprecedented. I pressed my hands to my belly, still flat, and tried to comprehend what he was telling me. 4 children. Growing inside me. Marcus, I breathed. Marcus. He was beside me in an instant. He always woke when I called, no matter how deep his sleep.
What?
What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Nothing's. I couldn't find the words. Marcus, I'm pregnant. His face transformed shock, then joy, then something almost like fear. Pregnant. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was made of glass. Kneel. That's wonderful. There's more. He pulled back, searching my face. More. Vorthanak says. He says there are 4. For children, Marcus. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at me, his gray eyes wide, his enormous hands trembling against my shoulders. 4, he repeated. 4. And then he laughed, that real, unguarded laugh I loved, and lifted me into his arms, spinning me around the chamber, while I laughed and cried at the same time. For children, he said, setting me down gently, his hands moving to my belly. 4. How is that possible? I pressed my hand over his. The gift. Alpha bloodlines. Apparently. I laughed again, giddy with the impossibility of it. Apparently we're very compatible. Word spread through the palace within hours. By midday, it had reached the city. By evening, the streets were filled with celebrating crowds. The kingdom had worried for years about the succession. Marcus had been king for 2 decades with no heir, no prospect of one, no interest in any woman who might provide one. The council had fretted. The people had whispered. The future had seemed uncertain. Now, suddenly, there was not just one heir, but 4. For children, for possibilities, for futures for the kingdom. The celebrations lasted a week. Aldrich came to see me on the 2nd day, his face bright with joy. 4, he said, shaking his head. You've outdone yourself, sister. I had help, I said dryly. He laughed. So I've heard. Marcus has been walking around in a daze since yesterday. I don't think he's slept. He hasn't. He keeps touching my belly and then jumping back like he's afraid he'll hurt them. Give him time. He'll adjust. Aldrich sat beside me, taking my hand. You know what this means, don't you? The prophecy. Her blood shall be their blood, her right ancient and undeniable. You're not just fulfilling it. You're multiplying it. I hadn't thought of that. Through the channel, I felt Vorthanak's warmth, agreement, confirmation, joy. The line is restored, he said. Not just continued, multiplied. For children, for mediators, for voices for the covenant. The future has never been brighter. Chapter 12. Growth. The first month passed easily enough. I was tired, yes, and occasionally nauseous, but nothing I couldn't manage. Marcus hovered constantly, bringing me tea and blankets and cushions, asking every few hours if I needed anything. It was endearing and exhausting in equal measure. By the second month, my belly had begun to swell, faster than a single pregnancy would have, the healers explained. For babies needed space, and my body was making it. Marcus talked to them every night. He would press his face to my belly, enormous now, impossible to miss, and speak in that low, rumbling voice that I loved. "Hello in there," he would say. "This is your father. I'm the large one you can probably hear through the walls. Your mother is the one who's been carrying you, which means she's already done more for you than I have, so you'll need to be especially good to her when you arrive." I would stroke his hair, laughing softly, while through the channel I felt Vorthanak's warmth, watching, witnessing, sharing in the joy. By the third month, I could no longer hide my condition. My belly was the size of a full-term single pregnancy, and I moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo. The court marveled. The physicians marveled. Even the old healers who had seen everything marveled. "I've never witnessed a quadruple pregnancy," the royal physician told me, his voice awed. "In 40 years of practice, I've never even heard of one. You're remarkable, Your Majesty." I smiled, my hand resting on my belly. I had help. The fourth month brought movement. I felt it for the first time in the middle of the night, a flutter like butterfly wings, then another. 4 distinct presences, for tiny lives, making themselves known. "Marcus," I whispered, shaking him awake. "Marcus, they're moving." He was awake instantly, his hands on my belly before his eyes were fully open. And then he felt it, a kick, strong enough to be unmistakable. His face. I'll never forget his face. The wonder.
The awe.
The tears that gathered in his gray eyes and spilled down his cheeks. "They're real," he whispered. "They're really real. They're really real." I agreed, crying with him. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth surrounded us, the eternal witness, sharing in the miracle. By the 5th month, my belly was enormous, the size of a woman about to give birth, with 3 months still to go. I moved slowly, carefully, with Marcus always nearby, always ready to help. The people of Vorthanak had taken to gathering in the courtyard below our chambers, hoping for a glimpse of me. When I appeared at the window, they cheered, not for me, but for the lives I carried, the future of the kingdom growing inside me. "They love you," Marcus said, standing behind me, his arms wrapped around me as best they could with my belly between us. "They love the babies," I corrected. "They love you. The babies are just the proof that you're staying." I leaned back against him, feeling his heartbeat against my back, feeling the 4 heartbeats inside me, feeling Vorthanak's warmth through the channel. This was what 19 years of running had been for. The 6th month brought challenges. I could no longer sleep comfortably, no matter how many pillows Marcus arranged around me. I could no longer walk far without resting. I could no longer do many of the things I'd once taken for granted. But I could still sit in the enclosure with my palms pressed to the stone. I could still feel Vorthanak's warmth surrounding me, supporting me, sharing the weight of what I carried. "You are strong," he told me. "Stronger than you know. These children are blessed by the covenant, by the blood, by the love that created them. They will be extraordinary." "I know," I whispered. "I can feel it. They're already so present, so aware. They are mediators before they are born. The gift flows through them already.
They know you.
They know him. They know me." I pressed my hands more firmly to the stone, feeling the truth of his words. 4 tiny presences, each one distinct, each one connected to me, to Marcus, to the dragon who had waited 8 centuries for this moment. The 7th month arrived, and with it, the first real scare. I woke in the night to pain, sharp, sudden, wrong. I cried out, and Marcus was there instantly, his face pale with fear. What is it? What's wrong? I don't know, some things. He lifted me in his arms, effortlessly, despite my size, and carried me to the physician's hall. I gripped his neck, breathing through the pain, focusing on the four presences inside me. They were still there, still strong, still fighting. The physicians worked through the night, monitoring, adjusting, calming the contractions that had begun too early. By dawn, the crisis had passed. The babies were safe. I was safe. Marcus didn't leave my side for 3 days. The 8th month was the longest of my life. I was enormous, so large that moving required assistance, so large that sleeping was impossible, so large that I wondered how my body could possibly stretch further. But the babies grew.
And grew. And grew.
The physicians checked on me twice daily, monitoring the heartbeats, measuring my belly, shaking their heads in wonder. For healthy babies, all thriving, all growing exactly as they should. I've never seen anything like it, the royal physician admitted. In 40 years of practice, never. Your body is doing something extraordinary, Your Majesty. I laughed weakly. It doesn't feel extraordinary. It feels like I'm about to pop. Marcus, ever present, took my hand. You're magnificent, he said simply. The most magnificent woman who has ever lived. You're biased. I'm accurate. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth pulsed with amusement, and with something else. Anticipation. The babies would come soon, and he would meet them, would know them, would bond with them as he had bonded with me. The future was almost here. The 9th month dawned clear and bright, the first true day of summer. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Marcus's hand on my belly, his eyes still closed, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer. They're quiet this morning, I murmured. His eyes opened. Too quiet.
No.
Just resting, I think. Gathering strength. He sat up slowly, his enormous frame unfolding with the particular grace he developed over a lifetime of being large. His hand never left my belly.
Soon, he said.
I can feel it. So can I. We lay there for a while, just being together, just being present. Through the channel, I felt Vorthanak's awareness. Patient, watchful, ready. And then the first contraction hit. I gasped, my hand flying to my belly. Marcus was instantly alert, his gray eyes sharp with concern. Was that? Yes. I breathed through it, the way the physicians had taught me. Yes, that was. Another one. Closer. Stronger. Marcus. He was on his feet in an instant, lifting me carefully, carrying me toward the door. I've got you. I've got you. The physicians are waiting. They've been ready for weeks. Through the pain, through the fear, through the overwhelming reality of what was happening, I felt it. Vorthanak's warmth, surrounding me, supporting me, carrying me as surely as Marcus's arms carried my body. I am here, he said. I will always be here. You are not alone. And I wasn't. I had never been alone, not really. Not since the moment I'd stopped running and turned toward the thing that had been running toward me my whole life. Chapter 13. The Arrival. The birth took 14 hours. Marcus stayed with me the entire time, holding my hand, wiping my forehead, murmuring words of love and encouragement. The physicians worked tirelessly, delivering one baby, then another, then another, then another.
For cries.
For tiny lungs filling with air for the first time. 4 new voices joining the song of the world. When they placed the first baby in my arms, a girl, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were already that particular gray, I wept. She's beautiful, Marcus whispered, his voice broken. She's perfect. The second was a boy, with my dark eyes and his father's determined chin. The third was another girl, smaller than her siblings but fierce, her cry the loudest of all. The fourth, another boy, born with his fists clenched, ready to fight the world. 4 babies. For heirs. For miracles. The physicians cleaned them, wrapped them, placed them in my arms one by one. Marcus knelt beside the bed, his enormous hands trembling as he touched each tiny face. "They're so small," he whispered. "So perfect." "They have your chin," I said, laughing through tears. "All of them, even the girls." He laughed too, that real, unguarded laugh that I loved. "They have your eyes. The girls do, anyway. The boys have mine." "They're perfect," I said. "They're absolutely perfect." Through the channel, I felt Vorthanak's presence, closer than ever before, warm with joy, pulsing with ancient satisfaction. "4," he said. "4 new voices. 4 new mediators. The covenant is not just restored, it is reborn." I closed my eyes, letting his warmth wash over me, letting the reality of the moment sink in. I was a mother. Marcus was a father. We were a family. And the dragon who had waited 8 centuries for this moment was watching over us all. Word spread through the city within hours. By evening, the streets were filled with celebrating crowds, singing, dancing, lighting bonfires, offering prayers of thanks. The kingdom had waited 20 years for an heir. Now it had 4. The council sent formal congratulations. The nobles sent gifts. The common people sent flowers. So many flowers that the palace corridors began to look like Marcus's mother's garden. Aldrich came to see us on the second day, his face wet with tears, his arms full of gifts for his nieces and nephews. 4, he said, shaking his head in wonder. 4. I still can't believe it. Neither can we, I admitted. I keep expecting to wake up. He sat beside me, peering at the 4 tiny faces in their cradles. They're beautiful. All of them. The kingdom will love them. The kingdom already loves them, Marcus said from the doorway, his voice rough with emotion. The celebrations haven't stopped since they were born. He crossed to me, bending to kiss my forehead, then looked down at his children with an expression I couldn't name: love, awe, fear, joy, all mixed together. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly that only I could hear. "Thank you for everything." I reached up and touched his face. "Thank you for waiting. For believing. For finding me." He pressed his forehead to mine. "I didn't find you. The pull found us both. We just finally stopped running." Chapter 14. The Naming. The naming ceremony was held on the 7th day, as tradition required. The great hall was filled to bursting. Nobles and commoners, council members and market healers, everyone who had a place in the new Vorenthos that was being born. Vorthanak attended as he had attended our wedding, his enormous head visible through the open arches, his amber eyes glowing with ancient approval. Marcus stood beside me, our 4 babies in our arms. I held the 2 girls. He held the 2 boys, looking impossibly vast with those tiny bundles against his chest. The High Cleric performed the rites, speaking the ancient words over each child, blessing them in the name of the gods and the covenant. And then it was time for the naming. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying through the hall without effort. "Our firstborn daughter," he said, looking down at the baby in my arms. "We name Elara. For the first mediator, for the woman who began this line, for the grandmother Neil never knew." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Elara, the name of legend, the name of the founder, now reborn. I spoke next, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Our second daughter, we name Lyra, for my mother, whose voice I found in the margins of books, who taught me to heal before I ever knew her name." More murmurs. Lyra, the lost mediator, the woman who had died too young, now remembered in her granddaughter's child. Marcus lifted the first boy in his arms. "Our firstborn son, we name Aldrich. For my brother, for the first king, for the bond between throne and covenant that has been restored in our time." Aldrich, standing in the front row, broke down in tears. Around him, the crowd smiled, understanding the weight of the gesture. I lifted the last boy, the smallest of the four, the one who had been born with his fists clenched. Our second son, we named Theron, for the healer who trained my mother, who died speaking my name, whose sacrifice made it possible for me to reach the city in time. Theron, a name no one in the hall recognized, but they would learn. They would learn of Mara and the assassin and the old healer who had died so that I could live.
Theron,
Named for a healer who died so I could live. A woman whose last words were about me, hoping I'd make it in time. Every name in that ceremony carried a story, carried someone who couldn't be there, but should have been. And that's what this channel is about, really. It's about the people who carried us here. The ones who believed before we believed in ourselves. The ones who hoped when hope seemed foolish. If you have someone like that in your life, someone who carried you, subscribe right now and comment their name. Let's fill these comments with the people who made us possible. The High Cleric raised his hands, pronouncing the final blessing. Elara, Lyra, Aldrich, Theron. 4 names, for children, for futures. May the Covenant watch over them always. May the dragon's wisdom guide them. May the love of their parents sustain them through all the years to come. Through the channel, I felt Vorthanak's warmth, intensifying, expanding, filling every corner of the hall. Elara, he said softly. Lyra, Aldrich.
Theron.
For names I will carry forever. For voices I will answer always. The Covenant is not just restored, it is multiplied. I looked at Marcus, at our children, at the dragon who watched over us all, and I understood something that had taken 23 years of running and 1 year of staying to learn. This was what the pull had been leading to. Not just survival. Not just connection. Not even love, though love was part of it. This. Family. Belonging. Home. Chapter 15. The Eternal Witness. A year passed. Then another. Then another. The children grew, as children do, fast and fierce and full of wonder. Elara had her mother's healing hands and her father's quiet steadiness. Lyra had her grandmother's gift for words and a laugh that could fill any room. Aldrich had his uncle's gentle heart and a deep love for the temple libraries. Theron, smallest at birth, fiercest by nature, had the dragon's own determination and a connection to Vorthanak that manifested earlier than any mediator in history. At 2 years old, Theron spoke his first complete sentence, not to me or Marcus, but to the dragon, through the channel, in words that only Vorthanak could hear. The other 3 followed soon after. By their 3rd year, all 4 children could reach Vorthanak, could feel his warmth, could share their thoughts and fears and joys with the ancient creature who had waited 8 centuries for this moment. The Covenant was not just restored. It was reborn, multiplied, made stronger than it had ever been. One evening, when the children were 3, I sat in the enclosure with my palms pressed to the stone. Outside, the city murmured. Above, the stars began. Through the channel, I felt 4 small presences, playing in the nursery, laughing with their nurses, already reaching toward the dragon, even in their sleep. And I felt Marcus, approaching through the corridor, his footsteps familiar, his presence a warmth I could feel even without the channel. Am I interrupting? Never. He sat beside me against the wall, our arms touching. Through the open roof, the stars wheeled above us, the same stars Vorthanak had watched for 8 centuries, the same stars our children would watch for the decades they were given. They're asleep, he said. Finally. Theron wanted one more story. Then Elara wanted one more. Then Lyra wanted one more after that. Aldrich just wanted to know if the dragon could see the stars from inside the enclosure. I laughed softly. What did you tell him? I told him to ask Vorthanak himself tomorrow. He paused. He will, won't he? He'll actually ask, and the dragon will answer.
He will.
They all will. The channel is stronger in them than it ever was in me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, is that hard for you? That they have something you didn't have? I considered the question.
No.
Epilogue. The Eternal Witness. One quiet evening, after the children were asleep and the city had settled into its night music of distant water and far-off laughter, I sat in the enclosure with my palms pressed to the stone. Through the channel, I felt 4 small presences, already reaching toward Vorthanak even in their sleep. Elara, with her mother's healing hands and her father's quiet steadiness. Lyra, who had her grandmother's gift for words and a laugh that filled any room. Aldrich, with his uncle's gentle heart and a deep love for the temple libraries. Theron, smallest at birth, fiercest by nature, who had the dragon's own determination and who had spoken his first complete sentence not to me or Marcus, but through the channel, to Vorthanak himself. The covenant was not just restored. It was reborn. I heard Marcus's footsteps in the east corridor before I heard the door. Am I interrupting? Never. He crossed to me, sat beside me against the wall, this enormous man folding himself into the space with the particular grace he'd developed over a lifetime of being large in a world built for smaller people. Our arms touched. He looked up at Vorthanak. Those gray eyes. The ones that had been trying to read the dragon for 30 years before they finally learned what they were looking at. Is he listening? Always.
Good.
He settled, tilted his head back. Long exhale. Rough day. The Northern Lords again, though Aldrich came around on the Torrancegate report, he actually apologized. And Vorthanak's suggestion about the Southern Water routing got tabled for further review, which means it will happen in 6 months after everyone has had time to feel like they decided it themselves. Governance. Governance. Yes. Through the channel, amusement. He says you remind him of Mirwin. Is that good? He says she was the most argumentative person he'd encountered in 800 years, and also the best king he served. Marcus looked directly at Vorthanak. I'll take it. The city outside went about its evening. The torches burned low. Above us, through the open roof, the stars arrived in their patient procession. The same stars Vorthanak had watched for 8 centuries, the same stars our children would watch for the decades they were given. I looked at this man. 7 feet of carefully controlled immensity, of quiet heart, of genuine decency that had not been manufactured by circumstance, but was simply structural. He had sat outside this enclosure at 14, uncertain of everything except that the physicians were wrong about the dragon. Now he sat inside it with me, with us, and the full weight of everything we'd become. I looked at this dragon. 800 years of watching, of waiting, of holding. The list of names he carried, my parents among them, preserved because he remembered when no one else did. The patience that became not patience anymore, but the shape of existence. The warmth that never died, even in 5 centuries of silence. And I thought, this is what 19 years of running was for. Not just survival, though survival mattered, OSA's gift to me above all others. But this. The moment when the last daughter of a forgotten line finds the creature she was born to serve and the man she was born to love, and the 3 of them become something none of them could have been alone. Marcus reached over and took my hand. His hand was enormous, warm, steady. Through it, I felt his pulse, strong and slow, the heartbeat of a man who had finally stopped being alone. Through the channel, Vorthanak's warmth surrounded us both. The oldest thing in the city, finally doing what he was made to do. I thought about OSA, about the river in winter, the running, the new names, and the hidden years, about everything she gave up so I could survive long enough to reach this moment. I thought about my parents, about their voices in the margins of books, reaching across 19 years of silence to tell me who I was. I thought about the pull, the word I could almost hear, the direction I couldn't stop facing. The thing I spent 19 years running from that was, all along, the only thing in the world that was running toward me. I have spent my whole life learning to be quiet, learning to be small, learning to be the kind of person no one remembers seeing. But here, in this enclosure, in this city, in this night, I am not quiet anymore. I am the voice of the ancient covenant, the last daughter of the Elara line, the woman who gave a dragon back its voice and a king back his heart. I am Neil, just the girl who survived. And I am finally home. 3 heartbeats in the quiet enclosure, his steady and immovable as the stone he leans against, mine bright and brave and finally at rest, his vast and slow and older than this city's name, surrounding us both. I have watched mountains learn to kneel, but this is something no mountain has ever learned. This is something possible only in the brief, extraordinary, irreplaceable life of creatures who do not live forever. The capacity for belonging. I belong to it too. 800 years of watching. 20 years of conspiracy. 7 years of searching. 1 garden, 1 enclosure, 1 impossible love that made all of it worth it. That's the story I came here to tell you. But here's the thing about stories. They never really end. They just wait for the next person willing to listen. This isn't where it ends. More stories are waiting on my channel. Subscribe for more.